Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Lisa Alastuey, and on this channel you will find a variety of inspirational and informational videos. Today it is my honor to introduce Dr. Peter Salerno, who is a psychotherapist, a trauma expert, a personality disorder expert, and an author. Welcome, Dr. Salerno.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
Yes, yes. So you started popping up on my YouTube, so I just love when I have a full circle moment and I get to talk to the people that I see online.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I've kind of been posting some things on YouTube and social media for the past year, mostly related to kind of issues related to personality pathology and that type of thing, which kind of started to get a bit of momentum. And
Yes, yes. So can you
so
share with the audience a little bit about your background and why you got into this type of field?
absolutely. So let's see. I'm licensed as a psychotherapist, and I have a doctorate and a master's degree in clinical psychology. And then actually, my bachelor's degree is in English literature because I was planning on a different career path back when I was studying as an undergrad.
Oh, okay.
And so, but interestingly enough, literature is what made me want to make the jump to psychology because I was enrolled in a master's program for English literature, and a psycho we had to use psychoanalytic theory to analyze some characters like in a Shakespeare play or something like that. And so I had to start studying up on that, and I got really fascinated with just human behavior and the mind and stuff like that. So I kind of jumped ship and went to psychology. And so typically the majority of my career has been working with trauma survivors of all kinds. I've done a lot of work with in the first responder community. I've done work with people who are suffering from childhood trauma and cumulative trauma and are, still struggling with that as adults. And so I got really immersed in healing through, healing trauma. And
Mhm.
then I started noticing, though, that there were a lot of individuals who were claiming to be victims or survivors of trauma, but were acting and behaving a little bit differently than people who normally have suffer from trauma do. And they also weren't really getting better with any of the treatment interventions that were being implemented that are typically evidence-based and are pretty effective. So that kind of led me on a path of, well, why are there certain people, certain types of people, let's say, that have pretty enduring patterns of behavior that don't seem to be responding, favorably to the interventions that other people who claim to be having the same past or the same background, why are these individuals just not getting any better or even collaborating in the treatment? And
Mhm.
so that kind of led me down a path to, and there was other personal things in my life, and I have family members and things like that, but that kind of started leading me toward the direction of studying personality disorders. We're taught in graduate school and in our degree programs that these disorders are the result of trauma or failed attachment and things like that. And but then there's a lot of people who have trauma and failed attachment who don't have a disordered personality. So I started wondering what the missing link was to that, because we
Mhm.
can't really predictably say if someone's traumatized that they're going to grow up to be narcissistic. I mean, we just can't predict that. And there's never been a study that can. But then, so I started kind of investigating, and I found not a lot, but a few experts in the field who were saying, well, maybe we need to look into some other causes of these disorders. And so that's kind of where I'm at now is I typically work with people who are struggling in relationships with individuals who don't change, say that they don't have a problem, and the therapy isn't helping. And so it's kind of all of this um, centered around that personality disorders are very, very, very what's the word I'm looking for? They just are, they're completely misunderstood, and they're misdiagnosed, and they're overlooked, and they're not even explained properly by many, if not most, professionals.
Yes, and you just opened a whole can of worms because there is a whole lot of misinformation online that
Yeah.
people are, turning to online therapy, and the people are saying the total opposite of what should be done or how to, handle certain situations, or not a clear understanding of personality disorders. I
Yeah.
saw your recent video where you talked about, the causes and how potentially it really could relate back to maybe biology, genetics.
Yeah, so this is much less known because we're not taught in, again, psychology, there's, depending on who you ask, what that even means. Psychology is often considered a soft science, so, or like a social science. So
Mhm.
the studies and the theories are based on observation alone and then interpretation. And then there's a consensus made based on stories we hear from clients. I mean, that's pretty much where we get the information, right? So, I mean, there's other types of studies and experiments, but there's never like controlled studies that can be replicated that can say, yeah, okay, so if you have this childhood, then you will have this trait um, as an adult. We can't really do that. What we can do is we can see our traits, personality traits, pathological ones and normal ones. Are they, inherited? Does it have something to do with heredity? Are
Mhm.
they Do these traits exist across the globe in every society, every culture, where normally we would assume that there would be differences in traits based on the social environment? Are the traits exactly the same? Turns out they are. So we have these innate inherent traits, and depending on our biology, depending on our genetics, which again is another very misunderstood word, um, there are some things that predispose us to having a certain type of temperament, and that temperament will then give rise to a disorder after that temperament has been exposed to an environment. But in most social and developmental theories, it's not that we have any startup material. It's that we're pretty much blank slates at the mercy of society, at the mercy of culture, at the mercy of parenting, and then that makes us who we are, or shapes us. And it's just not the case. I mean, we've overlooked the biological aspects of behavior for way too long, and it's really nothing new. It's just not popular knowledge.
I think the buzzword is epigenetics.
Yeah,
Can you
yeah,
touch on that a little bit?
yeah. And trust me when I say I've done extensive research on epigenetics, because my doctoral dissertation that I defended was about, do we attach in the womb? I was really fascinated by like when attachment to other human beings takes place. And so I did an investigation on it. Are there any prenatal imprints of attaching before you're even born? Like does that environment help a child in the womb like develop capacity to attach once they're born, depending on how the pregnancy went, how the quality of the relationship with the child and the mother's mental health and all that. And so one of the things that you can rely heavily on with that is this idea of epigenetics, um, which epigenetics is essentially that different genes can be expressed depending on the environment, and that doesn't necessarily alter the DNA sequence, but we can simply turn genes on and off based on environmental experience. And depending on what you've heard, that's actually not super accurate when it comes to something like personality. We can't use epigenetics as an explanation for why personality develops, and how personality is expressed or formed. So, and there's a lot of misconceptions about epigenetics. For example, there's this idea that you can inherit your grandmother's trauma it can just be transmitted across generations without you never having ever been traumatized because the genes switched. And so now you're getting this new expression, let's say, of something that you've never experienced, and it could potentially be it could be affecting you and your behavior when it was really originally your grandmother's trauma. And there's a lot of debate as to whether or not this is actually something that can take place.
Hmm.
There's a couple of experts that have analyzed all of the research in epigenetics to say, yeah, it's really not as it's not affecting things as much as we are, you know, giving it credit for. And I think one of the reasons it's a popular idea is because people don't like the idea that there are things that can't change or that are very, very hard to change. They like the idea that they can just change an environment and then switch on new genes, and then they all of a sudden don't have problems anymore, or they can, there's more flexibility with that idea. But
Hmm.
the reality is, this isn't something I've ever personally stated as an opinion. It's just in the literature and in the research. The reality is there are some things that are, innate, that are easier to change than others. And with these personality disorders, we found that they are some of the most stubborn, fixed types of traits
Hmm.
which explains why these individuals, regardless of their environment, um, have a very difficult time seeing that they are contributing to any problems in their life or in the lives of others. And these treatments that are supposed to work for most people typically don't work with these disordered personalities.
Hmm. Right, right. So when we talk about this, intergenerational trauma that,
Yeah.
gets passed on from generation to generation, is there a genetic component why alcoholism keeps showing up in the family or depression keeps showing up? But also like with regards to personality and temperament, do those show up? Like you have the same temperament of your grandfather.
You can. I mean, not identical. We all have a unique
Hmm.
temperament, but you can have certain tendencies in a temperament that were running in your families, but it's not because of the way um, your grandfather behaved or experienced life. It's more because that's just in your grandfather's genome, and then if you're related, you're going
Hmm.
to you're going to inherit some of that. And so it's not also there's no such thing as like a specific like if we're talking about personality, like there's no such thing as a narcissism gene. It's not the
Hmm.
way it's at all.
Hmm.
um or even a schizophrenic gene. That's not the way they work, even though most people have accepted that schizophrenia, for example, is highly heritable and that it runs in families. It used to be blamed on mothers, and a lot of people used to think that um cold, unemotional parents caused. They used to call it the schizophrenogenic mother. That
Hmm.
basically the way she raised the way she raised her children would determine whether or not they ended up developing schizophrenia. And now we know that it has a lot to do with genes. So um, obviously the genes need an environment to express themselves in. So environment, it's never one or the other, it's both. But when we're talking about the cause, you need that um, kind of genetic starting material for certain disorders. It's just the way it is. So yes, but you can have temperaments can run in families.
Hmm.
Temperaments can also just kind of be spontaneous, like they can develop through you know mutations or alterations in genes that are not necessarily shared by every member of a family, kind of like other conditions can as well.
Mm. Yeah, I've heard of the warrior gene. Have you heard of that?
No, actually, I have not.
Not that it's an actual gene, but yeah, that's a type of gene like, like when you talk about like back in time when they had to survive war and famine and fighting with each other, and the ones that, survived had the warrior gene.
Yeah, it was a polygenic situation, meaning lots of genes were involved,
Hmm.
not just like one specific gene.
Hmm.
But oftentimes too, people use that term genes not necessarily relating to um, DNA, but even like sociobiology and evolutionary biology, for example, they refer to a lot of things as genes or genetic, sort of like not as an actual gene, but just sort of that something that was inherited, um, rather than it being like a specific gene that they've located and identified as having that. So,
Okay. So I like that you pointed out that, psychology is a soft science. It's hard
mhm,
to get like some hard data on a lot of longitudinal studies and so forth. But I want to touch on maybe some modern problems with psychotherapy. So
mhm.
being in the field and the experience that you've had, what would you say is some of the current problems we're experiencing?
Well, first of all, I think that the definition of psychotherapy is so broad and now it's so open to interpretation that it confuses a lot of people. It confuses practitioners and it confuses the general public when they're trying to seek help because um, a lot of people have this assumption, it's no fault of their own, that therapy is like a one size fits all. And so if somebody's a licensed psychotherapist or if they're a psychologist or even a psychiatrist, then they're going to know what to do with your personal situation. And that's absolutely not true. Um, there are people who specialize in treating certain conditions and disorders, and there are others who, you know, really have no business treating those disorders, even if they're licensed to. So there's a difference between what we call a scope of competence and scope of practice. In scope of practice, if you're licensed as a therapist, you can treat any disorder that's in your diagnostic manual, let's say, but that may not be in your scope of competence because you haven't gotten any extensive training in that disorder.
Mhm.
But a lot of therapists try to treat disorders and conditions that they really don't know how to. And so that can create a problem for a client looking for a therapist who has a specific specialty. The therapist takes them on as a client, and they really don't have any business seeing that client because they don't know how to treat their specific condition or the presenting problems that they're coming with. So this idea that therapy is a one size fits all, you can just select a therapist, and now they have like these platforms where you can subscribe and like just pick a therapist, and you're I mean, from the client's perspective, you should be able to assume that they know how to help you. But those types of platforms and agencies don't actually have any sort of specialized care. So you could find yourself, searching for three or four or five or six different therapists until you find the right one in those settings. So that's kind of a downside to that. Um, I think from the practitioner's side, something that's really a problem is um, therapists who hold on for dear life to their theories, and they have these theory biases. Like, I went to this school, I was trained in this way, and no, you're not going to tell me that my education was wrong. I paid hard-earned money to get this education. That's what my professor said, and nothing changes. This is the way we operate, and that's extremely common. Um, and it can be potentially harmful for people trying to get better because they're going to try. A lot of therapists, whether it's conscious or not, and probably not intentionally harmful, they're going to try to maneuver clients into their theory, through those lenses. So they're going to see everybody from the same theory, and that can present a lot of problems.
Mhm. So my understanding is that, originally therapy had a lot of stigma around it. People didn't want to go to a therapist. They saw it as maybe like weak or to admit that you need help. We've definitely made a lot of strides since then, but do you think there's still stigma associated with the field?
Yeah, I think there's gonna be because, um, well, I think a lot of people who have actually had experiences in therapy probably could, recount a few experiences that weren't very helpful or good. And so one of the stigmas is like, one of the stigmas is this is what people do who can't get their life together, which isn't true. I mean, there's so many different interventions that have nothing to do with you being unstable. They just, you can go to therapy and be a pretty successful, well-adjusted person, but still not necessarily know how to solve a particular problem, on your own. I think that therapy has often been associated with like weakness or mental illness. And the truth is that most individuals who go to therapy don't have a mental illness. And they certainly don't necessarily need to identify as weak. But so I think some of those stigmas are kind of alleviating, like the reality that we are a social species who needs support from one another. I think those stigmas have kind of um, been removed a lot actually in the last, decade or so. More people are willing to go and say, hey, I need to talk to somebody or I need help. But I think too, the assumptions that a lot of people make about what therapy is, these are assumptions that are rooted in the theories that are like classical theories that, were created a long time ago that really don't have any relevance to our current culture, society, and obviously with advances in technology, they don't, they've proven to be ineffective, but they're still being taught and they're still being implemented. Um, and they're confusing people, and that's why people aren't getting better.
So can you give an example of that?
Well, yeah, like so for example, um, a lot of therapists still teach their clients that, or they assume that they know what a client is feeling based on the client's facial expression.
Mm.
So there's this idea, there was these studies done years and years and years ago that there are universal expressions of emotion on faces. And so we learn these things and then therapists teach them to their clients. So um, the client can then get this idea in their mind that, okay, if I'm if I have this expression on my face, that means this. And there's no evidence that there's any universal facial expressions of
Mhm.
emotion. You can have an expression on your face that could be perceived by a particular culture as like anger or sadness, but in reality, you're completely content and happy inside. So using this idea of reading someone being able to read your face based on the expression and then draw a conclusion as to how you're feeling inside,
Mhm.
that's still being taught by therapists to clients all the time, and it's just there's no science behind that. Um, Another thing that I'm pretty enthusiastic about, a topic about, is this idea that all emotional problems in adulthood have to stem from some sort of a rupture or an adverse experience in childhood, which is just not true. Um, it's just not true. I mean, there's been so many exceptions to this idea, but it's one of those classical ideas where we have to go back and dive into your childhood and do a deep dive, because if you're having a problem in a relationship at 50, something must have happened to you like between 0 to 18 months or 18 to 36 months, or when you were, before the age of 5,
Mhm.
that's causing you to have these relationship breakdowns. And um, that can be the case sometimes, but not nearly as much as people assume.
It's more a present day problem.
Yeah, it's more a present day problem. And also, um, when we're kids, obviously we're affected by our environment, but we're not passive recipients of our environment. We do, again, going back to temperament, we have our own temperament. We have minds of our own. We have our own, ways to be creative and constructive. We're not just like blank slates waiting for people to like
Mhm.
tell us how to do life. And then once we're 18, now that's the cutoff. And now we just, we have what we have and that's it.
Mhm.
Like we're constantly learning and growing and figuring ourselves out throughout the lifespan.
Okay.
And sometimes relationship problems are not related to something that happened to you when you were 3 years old. you know
Okay. So I see a problem with access to therapy. A lot of times, if somebody's dealing with something, it may take them 6 weeks or 8 weeks before they can actually get an appointment with a therapist based on if they stay in their network on their insurance. And so that can be a long time dealing with the issue by yourself before you can talk to a professional. So I'm seeing one gap that has been created uh, all online, and that is life coaches. But not only life coaches, I've seen grief coaches. I've seen parenting coaches, relationship coaches, you name it, menopause coaches. There is a coach for everything now. And I
Yeah.
think has a big thing to do with access, because not everybody maybe has insurance or can wait that long to see a therapist. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think coaching, well, I mean, the main difference from between coaching and psychotherapy through your insurance is if someone can take your insurance, they have to be licensed as a mental health professional, whereas there aren't any um, regulated licenses for coaching. Um, I don't necessarily, I mean, we can pick it whether that's a problem or not, but it is what it is in the sense that not everybody goes the psychotherapy route, and not everybody wants to do or can do the 3,000 plus clinical hours you need and then sit for your exams and then wait for your license. And I mean, that's a very, very intense process to become a licensed professional. I speak from experience. It's a huge commitment that spans, years. And then some people though kind of just they have like a specialty or like a passion, and they just want to kind of like zero in on that and focus on that and then offer it as a service because maybe that's producing good results, and so that's where coaches come in. um, I think that it can be confusing. I think that it should also be clear on what the distinctions are, but I do know some people that operate as coaches that um, I would totally advocate for their expertise and their abilities to help people. But you have to kind of know as a client of a coach what the differences are. For
Mm-hmm.
example, coaches can't diagnose mental disorders. They're not
Mm-hmm.
licensed to. Um, they can't take your insurance, as we said earlier. So I do think a lot of people though just claim to, they claim to be or claim to be something that they're not, or they claim to offer a service that they really can't provide successful results. And so there's kind of been an abuse of that freedom in a way, which is
Mm-hmm.
why I think it's why we have licensing boards and regulation and law and ethics in the first place, is to make sure people like are abiding by the standards.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I don't think it's I don't think it's all bad. I think it could be improved and regulated a bit, but
Mm-hmm. It is an interesting phenomenon, and I know there's like supply and demand. I mean, if they'll go out of business if there's no demand for it, obviously.
mhm,
But if somebody's like, for example, going through divorce and they're trying to decide, should I go see a psychotherapist or should I go see the divorce coach?
mhm.
And
Yeah,
if,
so it's also the method and the way that you're going to receive help is much different because typically, traditionally, psychotherapists, one, they're not allowed to give you advice. So you can't walk in and ask, hey, what do I do? And a therapist can't say, I think you should get a divorce. Like, that's just not how psychotherapy works. Um, One reason is because if a therapist tells you to do something specific and you go and do it and it causes you harm, I mean, that's you've caused harm to your client, right? And so there's no way that a therapist can know what the right decision is.
Mhm,
So they kind of have this more neutral stance and try to assist a client in coming to that decision for themselves using therapeutic interventions, hopefully like building insight and awareness and, maybe more realistic expectations of things. And then it's a collaborative effort. Coaches can tell you whatever they want to tell you. They can say, get a divorce, sue him, try to take the kids. Like, I mean, there's really no, I'm kind of I'm joking, but not really, because there's no um, limitations or regulations to what they're allowed to say because they're not under any boards that regulate law and ethics or anything. So you can get advice just handed to you by a coach because they're not under any liability and they're not under
mhm,
uh, any restrictions in that regard. So you also kind of have to know, I mean, there's a reason why um, there are these ethical considerations when it comes to psychotherapy. There's a reason why we don't just go and tell everybody whatever we want,
mhm.
cause a
And
lot
so,
of harm.
And plus, like, I would imagine, like, with the goals of psychotherapy is to help the individual become sovereign in their own recognition of feelings and choices and to own them, versus, like you say, going to somebody else who that's how they did it, that's how they're advising, and then you don't really have to think for yourself. So you just ask somebody to think for you. And maybe you're going to a coach for that. I'm not sure. I've never paid
Well,
for or went to one.
it's like when you go to a coach, I think what you're expecting is the right answer, like a guarantee. And, so maybe a divorce coach will tell you, like, yeah, based on my experience, I think that this is that divorce is the right decision.
Yeah.
You should leave the relationship. But there's no way that we could know if that's the right decision. I mean, there are some objective reasons to leave a relationship, and even in therapy, like you have to start creating a safety plan if there's domestic violence. You have to help them find resources to leave a situation if their life is in danger, things like that. Um, but it's just it kind of depends on what you're looking for. And you're right. Like psychotherapy is designed to create a sense of personal autonomy, agency, so that you no longer need the therapist. You can eventually, the goal is to fire them eventually. So because you feel like, okay, I got what I needed.
Yeah.
I will say one thing that is a gray area that's very challenging and that I think there's probably it's gonna have to develop over time as to a solution for it. There are some people who are going to therapy because there's someone in their life who is causing them a great deal of harm. And typically the rule is we can't speak about people who are not in the room as far as what's going on with them. So we can't formally diagnose somebody we haven't worked personally with. Even if somebody comes in and gives us like a description of exactly what kind of person you're dealing with, we can't say, oh, that person has this disorder. And, but what we also can't, we can't not do is we can't not provide some sort of feedback on that dynamic, right?
Hmm.
And so some therapists choose to just ignore it altogether. And I'm only going to focus on the person who's in front of me. So if this person comes to me and says, I'm in a relationship with someone, I feel like I'm being manipulated. I keep taking them back after they cheat on me and they've stolen money from me. And, they disappear for 5 days at a time. And I find out where they were and they lie about it. You can't say to one of those individuals, I mean, you shouldn't say, well, I mean, we should probably work on your insecurities
Hmm.
because you know there might be legitimate reasons why this person is saying these things. It's not always that they're just insecure and their perception is wrong.
Hmm.
So so in that case, I think there needs to be a little bit more clarity on, well, yeah, we can't say, oh, well, that's the person that you're dating is has this disorder and that's why they're behaving this way. There's no way to really know that. um but I just know that there are a lot of clients who are stuck in a position where they feel like they needed a therapist to say, okay, yeah, I validate that. That's a bad behavior, and you might need to consider if it doesn't get any better that you have a decision to make, right?
Hmm.
Because it sounds like an enduring pattern of behavior on the part of this person that you're describing to me. I think therapists shy away from that altogether because the person's not in the room, and they've actually done studies on that based on survey data that show that people will stay with abusive partners much longer if the therapist like doesn't say anything about, maybe
Yeah.
that, and so I think if we take an oath to do no harm, which we
Hmm.
do, we need to factor that part in. Like we can't just ignore
Hmm.
something said about someone else just because they're not in the
Hmm.
room. And again, that's kind of a gray area. I understand why therapists can't just outright say, "Oh yeah, that person is a psychopath and you need to leave them because they're
Hmm.
going to kill you in 3 years." I mean, you can't say that,
Hmm.
but you also need to be able to say something like, "Yeah, this situation doesn't sound very good."
Yep.
Versus maybe you're codependent. I mean,
Right.
that's not going to help. It's going to invalidate, and it's actually not even relevant to the
Or not
situation.
helpful. Yeah. If you're an abuse victim, my understanding is that, never mind the stress responses that are going off because of the emotional abuse. But it also affects your thinking, your executive functioning. So I think it's really important, for somebody to like point it out because they might be so like brainwashed to their situation that they're not even
Correct.
thinking clearly.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's one of the things I do in my work is I have a list of symptoms of like what it's like to be in a relationship that's abusive, and I have like a list of symptoms. If you're experiencing these on a chronic basis, it's likely that you are a victim of some sort of manipulation or coercion or abuse. And those aren't diagnoses, but those are, I mean, we can draw conclusions based on the way somebody has their, what's causing the symptoms. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
so it's really important to realize that we have to factor in that people, when they come to therapy or if they're being coached, the person sitting in front of you is, you know, they do have relationships outside of this context that could be really hazardous to their health. And it's not all just originating in them, and they're just unstable in some way and they need to work on that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, yeah, it really makes you question, how does it show up in the body, with
yeah,
with their blood pressure, with cancer, with heart disease, that it could be, impacting them or affecting them from a toxic relationship.
absolutely.
Yeah. So you were talking about maybe some modern problems with psychotherapy. Let's touch on when should somebody maybe rethink that the therapist client is not a fit and maybe you should fire your therapist.
Um, well, I guess to a degree it does depend on what you're seeking therapy for. So some people do seek traditional therapy, which is more of like the psychodynamic or psychoanalytic type of therapy, where it's a long process and the relationship itself is considered to be the agent of change and improvement. And so some people want a therapist for years and years and years. And so there's not necessarily anything wrong with that as long as there's therapeutic material to process, and there's to a degree measurable results. um but that's what I would say. I mean, you fire a therapist when you've met your goals and so you don't need them anymore, or you need to you need to take a break and you can check in later, or you fire your therapist because you're not getting results. I mean, period. I mean, people all the time. It's funny, like when I if I get a new client, I will ask about previous, experiences with therapy. And I'm not a good fit for everyone, so we don't always, develop a therapeutic relationship and move forward. Sometimes I refer out, or we won't do one or two, and I think it's not a good fit. Therapists should be doing that. I think a lot of them are willing to hold on to clients much longer than they need to.
Mhm.
Um, but they should be able to say, look, I don't think that this is a good fit. I'm not sure I'm the best person to be able to help you meet your goals. So I'm going to refer you to somebody else who I think might be a better fit. Um, but I would say a lot of clients will say that the therapy is helpful, and then I'll ask how it was, and they often don't have really an answer. And really, I think what happened is that someone was just being listened to, and that's about it. And
Mhm.
so we want to be able to measure progress. Like if somebody comes to me and you know, they're having just someone like with who has trauma, like if they're having nightmares, if they're having intrusive, thoughts that like are ruminating, and they just can't stop thinking about certain things, if they're no longer leaving their house, if they're avoiding certain situations, I mean, those things should be able to be measured over time that they're improving, you know.
Mhm.
And if they're not, and I would say that you might need to reconsider the treatment plan or reconsider the therapy, or maybe the modality, the interventions aren't working, and reconsider those, or maybe um, think about getting a new therapist. But I would always say fire a therapist who, um, I guess, doesn't seem like they are as committed as you are to the process. And
Mhm.
that can happen
Mhm.
um, for a number of reasons, whether it's burnout or laziness or trying to group each client in the same category. They're all the same. I have my one, my one theory, and if they're not getting better, it's because they're not fitting into that theory.
Mhm.
But, that's, I think I do know people who have practiced that way.
Mhm.
Um,
What about I've heard somebody say before that they were a male and they only wanted to go to a male therapist. Um, is there validity to that? For me, I think he was just looking for somebody to validate him. And he didn't, I don't think he would have gotten it from a female therapist, according to him.
um, I think that there are times when it probably, like, depending on attachment relationships from early on in life, I think if you can benefit, if you feel like you're going to benefit from, well, let me put it this way. If the option is like someone of your same sex or gender or not therapy at all, I would say, fine, go if that's going to
Mhm.
make you comfortable. There are some theories that suggest that, if you had a relationship, if you have trouble trusting women, let's say, and you're a man and you're looking for a therapist, it might actually be a good idea to see a female therapist, because then you can have that corrective emotional experience and stop generalizing that all women can't be trusted and vice versa. But I wouldn't try to push yourself out of a comfort zone too much with that.
Mhm.
Um, and to your point, yes, I think some people will assume that if like a guy, if he sees a guy therapist, that maybe he will be understood in a way that a female therapist won't understand. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that that's true. I don't know what the intentions of the clients are either. I mean, maybe the client
Mhm.
wants something validated that's inappropriate, and they think a guy would be more willing to than a woman.
Mhm.
Which then again, that whole therapy breaks down right then and there, because the person isn't being authentic in the first place. Um, but I do believe there are just genuine cases of people feeling more comfortable with the same sex, or um, as far as outcomes and efficacy, there's no way to really say for sure one if sex will play a factor in the healing process for a particular client.
Okay. And another like trend that I'm seeing is these like call-in therapy shows. One that I listen to sometimes on YouTube is Dr. John Deloney. I don't know if you've ever heard of him or seen him. Okay. But yeah, so it's like therapy over a phone call. And you're right. I think a lot of times people like their grief deserves a witness. Like they need somebody to hear them. Um, but then also giving advice over the phone, which he does.
Well, I don't think that's actually therapy. I mean, I don't think, I
Okay.
mean, are people listening to it?
Yeah, yeah. It's a YouTube channel.
Okay.
It's the Dr. John Deloney. It's
Yeah.
really good, but I don't know how
Well, he might be, I
ethical
mean,
it is.
I don't know what his credentials are, as far as like, I don't know if he's licensed
Yes,
as
he's
practice.
licensed.
Okay.
Hmm.
This is probably something he's doing on the side outside of his license. Because, I mean, one, if he's
Mm,
licensed, you can't publicly treat people who can listen,
uh-huh.
because that's a breach of confidentiality, and unless they signed like an authorization or something.
They probably
Um,
do.
so maybe he's having live sessions with his therapy clients on YouTube. I mean,
Hmm.
I that's that's a possibility. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it if the
Yeah.
if the client is consenting, but typically, um, but I have, to me, that almost reminds me of something more like an advice type of show,
Hmm.
where,
Hmm.
like, people are calling in and getting advice. I mean, how long are the sessions? Are they?
Oh, it's just like a phone call, like 10-minute phone
Oh,
call.
okay. Yeah.
And it's only with the one person, the other person's not there, so he can only talk to that one person. But
Yeah.
it runs the gamut, from divorce, cheating, porn, like all kinds of stuff where people call in
Yeah.
on. But no, he's really good. I just was wanting to get your take on it.
I don't think that would be he would be operating under the umbrella as of like licensed professional in that regard.
Mhm.
Probably
Right.
just using his expertise to give, some feedback and advice, which is totally fine.
Hmm.
I don't know, like, if somebody's looking for that as like to be the thing that's gonna, you know, solve all their problems. I doubt that.
Hmm.
Maybe they meet with him longer for longer periods later.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about when should you, step away from or fire your therapist. How about when you should fire your client? Have you ever had to do that, and under what circumstances?
Yes, you fire clients. So therapists are given, clients are given, um, and I do both. So I actually do coaching and consulting with people who don't want therapy. They just want to know, like, hey, what's going on? Um, and that's kind of like a separate thing from like entering into a psychotherapeutic relationship where you have a contract and you sign a consent form. So when you're in a therapeutic relationship with a therapist, what happens is you're given what's called an informed consent, which is like how they practice, what their credentials are. Um, and then in mine, I don't know if all therapists do this. I think most do, but I have a little section that says why I will have the right to terminate therapy at any time. And so there's parameters to the relationship, and those parameters often involve like if I'm feeling harassed or abused in any way, shape, or form, if I'm experiencing the client as uh, like being inappropriate in the sense of like showing up to a session like intoxicated, and all of these things happen because they've happened, and so you want to create parameters so that they, make people aware that they can't do these things. Um, there's also like limits and parameters to therapeutic relationship in the sense of like you can't be friends with a client, you can't have like a dual relationship, so you can't like you can't be a member of their gym if they own a gym and also be their therapist. I mean, there's just kind of things like that where you're just not supposed to, intermingle the professional relationship with personal or other business. And so I have all of those things. And if anybody violates those, then I have the right to terminate. But also, there are some clients who um, I will tell from the beginning, if you don't work within this treatment frame, then you're not going to be invited back. Because there's this idea, I think, for a lot of clients that I can just go and do whatever I want and dump on my therapist and mistreat them and everything, and it's their job to listen. People with personality disorders seem to think that that's like really okay, and so
I'm
I have.
paying you.
Yes, I'm paying you. And so I have a separate treatment agreement for people that are a little bit more difficult. And I actually have them sign it. And if they violate any of the parameters, then I let them know that we're not going to be able to meet again. Um, there's actually uh, one of the one a really popular uh, therapy known as dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT. That's typically for people who are struggling with emotion regulation, and it was originally designed or developed for people with borderline personality disorder.
Mhm.
And the woman who developed that, she used to get accused by her colleagues as they used to call it blackmail therapy,
Hmm.
because she would actually say like, um, I mean, she would say things like, you have to earn your right to be my client. I'm not just gonna let you walk all over me. And so you have to behave good enough in order for me to work with you. And if not, I'm gonna fire you. And
Mhm.
that seems like it would be extremely counterintuitive for a therapist to say, but it's actually for some people it's very containing and very helpful. And
Mhm.
it's not how we talk to people in our personal lives, but um, there needs to be pretty strict parameters around the treatment and the relationship. Otherwise, people like to try to push the boundaries and manipulate and abuse them, and um, so yeah, so clients can be fired.
Mhm. Yeah, it definitely, like you said, they might cross your boundaries, like overly dump on you. Have you ever experienced compassion fatigue?
Yeah, I mean, I experienced that like early in my career when I was working with certain populations where it was just like really helpless situations, and just watching what people went through and how they were kind of just unable to get out of these situations. Like you can bring a lot of that home, and just you just get exhausted, you get fatigued, and um, some of the stories that you hear that people have been through and that they're still going through. So that certainly has happened in my career.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me just talk to you about a couple terms that I hear a lot about, and that's false hope and victimhood. So with regards to like therapy, how do you balance that with your clients when you know maybe the situation is not good, it's dire, but you can't tell them what to do, right? But you don't want to give them false hope. And I know sometimes coaches, the bad coaches, might give false hope.
So false hope in the sense of like saying something to them like it'll get better or like something like that.
Yeah, when it's all the odds and the betting odds are the person's not going to change, the situation's not going to get better, but we're not going to pretend here session after session thinking that it will be.
And we're talking about the client here. Like the client's
Yeah,
not going to get better.
yeah.
I mean, I think the best thing to do is be honest about that. I don't think you should hold on to a client if you can't help them. And
Hmm.
there are some clients who won't let you help them too. That's another thing to consider. Like there are some clients, we can't always assume collaboration with every client. There are some who maybe they don't know why they're having so much trouble, and so they're perceiving their problems in their life as different. They're not able to really identify what it is that's causing it, and they're kind of relying on you to figure it out. And sometimes that just can't always be the case.
Hmm.
So there's even clients who do something called a help rejecting complaining, where they reject all the help you give them and then they complain that you didn't make them feel better. In those cases, I tell them I'm probably not the right fit. Like, I don't think, if I can't help you, I don't think there's any reason to continue. And I'm not going to tell you that if you come 3 or 4 more times that you're gonna, get better. I don't use those words like
Hmm.
things are going to get better within this amount of time, or
Hmm.
I have hope. I'll tell clients that I have hope that they can figure it out, but that won't necessarily be with me. But
Hmm.
I don't really mess around with the false hope thing.
Hmm.
Um, you know,
I have seen, maybe some take advantage of people, you know, collect the co-pays, collect the money because they just are giving them false hope on in their sessions and stuff. So I appreciate
yeah.
the honest upfront therapist or coach
Mhm.
that, puts it out there. Let me ask you about the use of things like mushrooms and ayahuasca for
Mhm.
treating complex PTSD.
Yeah. Uh, um, there's new, I mean, there are new, whatever you want to call them, integration treatments. And some people say they work, some people say they had terrible experiences on them. There's even some, you can become like a ketamine assisted therapist now where like you collaborate with a psychiatrist who prescribes the medication, and then the client, um, signs a bunch of waivers, takes the medication before they see the therapist, and then that's supposed to help them get more in touch with the therapy processing and stuff like that.
Matthew Perry had that in his system. The actor from Friends,
Oh, really?
he had that in his system. Yep. He was taking ketamine for his depression and addiction.
Yikes. I'm hoping well, I'm hoping the dosage would be a bit more different and regulated if we're doing it in therapy. But yeah,
Yeah, they're
that's,
actually going after the doctor. I mean, it's a whole scandal.
oh, okay. Yeah, that's too bad.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, and then I've known people, I've had clients who have in before meeting with me tried, they've done ketamine. I think they're like infusions or in like where they actually get it intravenously, like at at like a clinic, and then it's supposed to last a certain amount of time, like 6 months or
Mm.
something, for anxiety and things like that. And then there's microdosing with mushrooms. There's ayahuasca ceremonies. I've never even dabbled into any of that myself personally. I
Hmm.
don't have any judgment about it. It's
Hmm.
not a path I took.
Hmm.
I have had clients who have thought it was going to be like a groundbreaking, life-changing thing for them, and it ended up,
Magic.
and they had PTSD or complex PTSD, and it actually made things much worse. That whatever happened during the ceremony and during the medicine made them feel like they were like in the pit of hell and couldn't get out. So I would say it probably depends on each individual. But
Mhm.
my clients that I work with, I say if you're gonna have engage in something like that outside of the context of therapy and it's going to be your own thing, and I obviously can't tell them what to do,
Mhm.
maybe get the complex PTSD symptoms a little bit more regulated and stabilized before you and do something like that. And then there's other people who would say this guy is crazy. That's what stabilizes the trauma symptoms. So I it's been so hit or miss, and the feedback that I've received from clients
Mhm.
who've done it, that I'm not going to say for with certainty that it's all bad, and it's certainly not all good. It's, it probably
We
still
just
needs.
don't have studies, right? There's
We
not
need
really.
more research as well. Yeah, that's where we need to go, is we need to figure out how to make it a little bit more controlled and you know,
Yeah. Because I know a lot of people, you can't do a lot of this stuff legally in the US. So they go abroad,
yeah,
South America or wherever, and participate in ceremonies, and sometimes having very high expectations that a magical experience is going to happen.
yeah,
And again, I think it's very individual, like you say, with the
yeah.
results.
I mean, it really is, because I've heard people say that they had this, they went to this ceremony, they were expecting this incredible, experience, and they were just bored the whole time. Like
Hmm.
they felt like they were in a perpetual boredom they couldn't get out of until it wore off. And then others had these terrifying visions, and then others felt good. So
Hmm.
it really isn't, like again, just like therapy, it's not like a one size
Hmm.
fits all. It's certainly not a miracle cure. I
Hmm.
also, I would encourage people to try, just like, I understand that these things aren't the same as like alcohol and other, illicit drugs that can cause harm, but they are mind altering. And so, the what we've always
Watch
taught,
out.
yeah, what we've always taught is like, let's try to tackle it on our own without that kind of an assistance,
Yeah.
unless it's a disorder that is like, there's like literally defects in the structure and functioning of the brain that aren't related like to trauma. Like, I mean, there are some pharmacological treatments, like, for depression and stuff, where people, or even schizophrenia, where medication is necessary. Like,
Mhm.
but it's not a medication that alters the mind. It's not like you don't go on a trip. It's just something that regulates the symptoms, right?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah,
Um,
I think we have like a Joe Rogan, him talking about DMT on his
oh yeah,
podcast a lot of times. I mean, it just, for people who never even heard of that, it
yeah,
sounds like a miracle cure or something, but it's not that simple.
right, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're getting here toward the end. Is there anything else that you would like to add with regards to like any problems associated with modern psychotherapy?
I mean, I personally would like to see psychotherapy and psychology, and it's not that it's not happening. I think just maybe I should rephrase that and say I would like to see popular media kind of bridging this gap between like psychology and like other fields and disciplines such as like neuroscience, neurobiology. I think we can learn a lot from that.
Nutrition.
Nutrition, absolutely, 100%. I think it would be cool to have like this like integrated approach, like a transdiagnostic type of thing that's more popular and more well known versus like um kind of there's just these divisions right now.
It's so
And
fragmented. That's our whole healthcare system.
right. So
Hmm.
that would be cool down the road, is to kind of have more of like an integrated model where people don't get so um like discouraged, because the process is just horrible. Like you said, there's wait lists to get in. So even when you do make the decision to try to get help, you have to wait 2 or 3 months sometimes, and it's so saturated, and that's just not good.
Hmm. But yeah, I think it would be great if the therapist says, "Well, how's your diet? What have you been eating?" Because that could affect your mood and your anxiety and your depression, and you know, having those conversations too. It should be comprehensive and holistic.
Yeah, I think some of them do. I think some of them do. So that's really, I noticed that's becoming more and more popular. So
Oh,
that's good. It's a good sign.
awesome, awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Peter Salerno. I appreciate you coming on my channel today. And if you guys like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching. Thanks.
Thank you.